A retired Navy SEAL came to the frozen edge of Minnesota seeking silence, but Winter had other plans. During a brutal cold spell, he heard a sound beneath the ice and pulled a German shepherd from a freezing lake, moments from death. But this was no ordinary rescue. The dog carried old scars and a strange tattoo hidden beneath its fur. Signs of training, violence, and a past someone wanted erased. By saving one life, the Navy SEAL unknowingly took something that didn't belong to him. The ice is cracked, the truth is surfacing, and the people hunting for what they lost are already moving. Before the story begins, please support us by subscribing to the channel. The wind howled across the lake like a warning, rattling the cabin windows, and for the first time in years, the Navy SEAL realized the battle he tried to leave behind had found him again. Winter lay flat and merciless over Duluth, Minnesota, the sky a pale tin lid pressed low, the lake sealed in blue-white silence that made every breath feel borrowed. Ryan Mercer had chosen this edge of the world because it did not ask questions. He was 36, a white American with the kind of angular face that looked carved rather than grown, high cheekbones, a squared jaw roughened by a weak stubble, and eyes the color of cold steel that missed nothing even when he wished they would. Years in the U.S. Navy SEALs had trained his body to move without wasted motion and his mind to scan, assess, decide. Years after discharge had trained his heart to stay quiet. He lived alone in a modest cabin north of town, not because he hated people, but because noise, human noise, still arrived like incoming fire. The winter helped. Snow softened the world. Ice simplified it. That afternoon he was walking the shoreline path along Lake Superior, boots crunching over crusted drifts, checking the ice the way fishermen did, even when they pretended they didn't worry. Ryan wore a dark parka faded at the seams, wool gloves scarred by old burns, and a knit cap pulled low over short brown hair already touched with premature gray at the temples. His posture was relaxed but alert, the stance of a man who could rest and guard at the same time. The lake looked solid, deceptively calm, the surface brushed smooth by wind. Ryan knew better. Ice lied. He heard it then, a sound so thin it almost vanished into the wind. Not a crack, not the groan of shifting ice, but a scrape followed by a muffled whine. Ryan stopped. His shoulders tightened, instinct flaring before thought. The sound came again, sharper this time, desperate. He moved toward it, scanning the surface for irregularities, noticing a faint spiderweb fracture stretching like a vein beneath the snow. Kneeling, he pressed a gloved hand to the ice. Cold burned through the fabric. Beneath the translucent blue, something dark moved. The ice gave a brittle sigh and broke wider. A large head surged up, eyes wild, water sheeting off black and tan fur. A German shepherd, young, maybe 3 or 4, thrashed in the black water, paws clawing uselessly at the slick edge. The dog's coat was thick and well kept, not the patchy fur of a stray, and around its neck hung the remains of a severed tactical collar, the cut too clean to be an accident. Ryan felt his pulse settle into that old familiar rhythm. Fear burned off, replaced by clarity. "Easy," he said aloud, voice steady, though no one had taught him that dogs listen to tone better than words. He dropped flat on his stomach to spread his weight, sliding his pack off with one hand. Inside were a coil of rope, ice screws, a compact axe, tools he carried because winter demanded respect. He drove the axe head into the ice to widen the opening just enough, careful not to shatter it further. The dog lunged again, slipping, a hoarse sound tearing from its throat. Ryan caught a glimpse of the animal's eyes, intelligent, focused even in panic, and something inside him clenched. Soldier's eyes looked like that. He looped the rope under the dog's chest when it surged close, bracing his boots against a snow ridge. The water soaked his sleeves instantly, cold like teeth, but he leaned back and hauled with controlled force, counting his breaths. The German shepherd fought him for half a second, then understood and went still, trusting. That trust hit Ryan harder than the cold. With a final pull, the dog slid onto the ice, collapsing in a shuddering heap, sides heaving, fur rimed with frost. Ryan dragged the animal farther from the break, then shrugged out of his parka and wrapped it around the dog's torso, rubbing vigorously to bring warmth back. Up close, the shepherd was magnificent despite the terror. Broad chest, powerful shoulders, a long muzzle dusted with ice crystals. Its paws were scraped raw, pads split from clawing at the ice. When Ryan parted the fur at the neck to check for injury, he saw it. A small, precise tattoo on the skin behind the ear. The characters K-19 inked in clean black lines. Below it, a narrow scar ran straight as a ruler, healed but unmistakable. This wasn't a pet that had wandered too far. This was an animal that had been handled, trained, cut. Ryan swallowed, feeling something old and unwelcome stir behind his ribs. He remembered men with numbers instead of names, remembered how easy it was for organizations to call lives assets. The dog lifted its head slightly, ears twitching, eyes locking onto Ryan's face with startling composure. No growl, no snap, just watchfulness. "All right," Ryan murmured, the corner of his mouth lifting despite himself. "You're tougher than you look." He hoisted the dog, lighter than it should have been, over his shoulder in a fireman's carry and started back toward the cabin, each step careful, deliberate. Behind him, the lake whispered and closed over its wound, smooth again, as if nothing had happened. Ryan didn't look back. He had the weight of a life on his shoulder now, and some rescues, he knew, were only the beginning of the fight. Ryan reached the cabin just as dusk began to bruise the sky, purple and gray, the cold sharpening with the kind of patience that promised a long night. Inside, the small space smelled of pine resin and iron from the stove. He laid the German shepherd gently on a wool rug near the hearth, movements precise but careful, as if the dog were fragile glass instead of muscle and bone. The animal trembled violently now that the immediate danger had passed, shock catching up like a delayed wave. Ryan fed more logs into the stove, sparks snapping upward, then knelt and began working warmth back into the dog's body with steady hands. Up close, the shepherd's condition became clearer. He was underweight beneath the thick coat, ribs faintly visible when Ryan pressed along his pod, but there was nothing sloppy or neglected about him. The dog's nails were trimmed evenly. His teeth, when he briefly bared them in discomfort, were clean and strong. This was an animal that had been maintained, measured, corrected. Ryan wrapped him in dry blankets and set a bowl of lukewarm water nearby, letting a few drops touch the dog's tongue before easing the bowl closer. The shepherd drank carefully, controlled even in desperation, then stopped on his own. That discipline unsettled Ryan more than panic would have. "Yeah," Ryan muttered, his voice low, edged with something like dark humor. "You've done this before." The dog lifted his head, ears twitching at the sound. His eyes, deep brown, almost black in the firelight, tracked Ryan's movements with unsettling focus. When Ryan checked the paws again, cleaning the cuts and rubbing circulation back into the pads, the shepherd endured it with clenched stillness. Only once did he let out a short, breathy whine, quickly swallowed. Ryan caught himself nodding, the way he used to with rookies who tried not to show pain. He worked through the night in practice cycles: heat, hydration, rest. Outside, the wind scoured the trees, but inside the cabin the stove radiated a stubborn pocket of survival. Ryan brewed coffee he didn't drink just for the comfort of the ritual and sat with his back to the wall, watching the dog sleep in shallow increments. Sometime near dawn, when the worst of the shivering finally eased, Ryan noticed the shepherd had shifted closer to his boots, body angled protectively rather than seeking heat. That choice, instinctive, untrained in the moment, hit harder than the tattoo had. Morning light crept in pale and unforgiving. Ryan pulled on a heavier jacket and stepped outside to check the generator and the lake line, the dog watching him through the window with quiet intensity. When Ryan returned, the shepherd struggled upright, hind legs stiff but functional, tail low but wagging once, tentative. Ryan crouched to his level. The dog sniffed him, then pressed his forehead briefly against Ryan's chest, a quick, firm contact that felt like a check-in rather than affection. "Guess we're past introductions," Ryan said, and the corner of his mouth twitched. He fetched food, high-protein rations he kept for winter emergencies, and the shepherd ate slowly, methodically, never taking his eyes fully off the room. When Ryan moved, the dog tracked him, positioning himself with clear sight lines to the door and windows. It was textbook behavior. Ryan didn't need a manual to recognize a working animal. By mid-morning, necessity forced a decision Ryan had been avoiding. Supplies were low, and the dog would need antibiotics and proper treatment. Duluth meant people. People meant questions. Ryan loaded the shepherd into the back of his old pickup, lining it with blankets. The dog jumped up without hesitation, settled, and braced for movement like he'd done it 100 times. Ryan drove with his jaw tight, the road glittering with ice. The general store buzzed softly with heat and murmured conversation. Heads turned when Ryan stepped in, taller than most, broad-shouldered, face unreadable. The shepherd remained in the truck, sitting upright, eyes forward. As Ryan loaded kibble and medical supplies, a voice cut in from behind. "Didn't expect to see you today, Mercer." Sheriff Wayne Grady stood near the counter, a white American man in his early 50s with a thick neck and a softening midsection that didn't quite hide the strength beneath. His uniform was immaculate, mustache trimmed into a careful line, eyes sharp and restless. Grady smiled easily, but the smile stopped short of warmth. Ryan had seen that look before, men who smiled to measure, not to welcome. "Storm didn't ask," Ryan replied evenly. Grady glanced toward the window, toward the truck. "Heard you pulled something out of the lake." His tone was casual, but the question landed with weight. "Big dog, Ryan met his gaze, unblinking. "He fell through the ice." Grady nodded slowly. "Lucky you were there." His eyes flicked back to Ryan's face, then away. "Town ordinance says animals like that need to be registered. Safety thing." "I'll handle it," Ryan said. Grady smiled again, thinner this time. "I'm sure you will." Across the street, seated by the diner window, Hannah Blake watched the exchange over the rim of her coffee cup. She was in her early 30s, white, tall, and lean, with sharp cheekbones and blonde hair pulled into a practical knot that suggested she disliked fuss. Her winter coat was scuffed at the elbows, notebook open beside her phone. She had come to Duluth chasing a slow human interest piece and had nearly missed the tension entirely until she saw the way the sheriff's posture changed, the way Ryan's shoulders squared. Hannah's eyes narrowed with interest. Stories announced themselves like that, she knew quietly, before they roared. Ryan finished loading his supplies and drove off, unaware of the gaze following him. The shepherd shifted in the back, alert, ears forward, as if sensing something had changed. Ryan rested one hand on the wheel, the other clenched unconsciously. Saving a life was never simple. Keeping it safe, he suspected, would be harder. Snow fell again that night, not in violence, but in quiet persistence, layering the forest in soft deception, as if the world itself were trying to look innocent. Ryan felt the change before he saw it. The cabin was warm, the stove humming low, but something in the air had tightened. Frost lay near the door, no longer sleeping. The German shepherd's body was still, coiled rather than relaxed, ears angled toward the trees. His breathing was slow, controlled, not fear, assessment. Ryan recognized it instantly, the posture of a sentry who had learned that danger rarely announced itself loudly. Ryan moved to the window and peered out. The tree line stood dark and unmoving, pines heavy with snow, moonlight bruised by clouds. Nothing obvious. That bothered him more than headlights or footprints would have. He checked the locks, then the back door, then the generator. All functional. When he turned back, Frost was watching him. eyes reflecting firelight, steady and unreadable. "Yeah," Ryan murmured. "I feel it too." Sleep came in fragments. Ryan dozed in a chair with boots on, old habits clawing back without invitation. Near dawn, Frost rose silently and padded to the window again, nose close to the glass. Ryan followed his gaze and finally saw it. Tracks. Fresh. Human boots, size large, deliberately placed, circling the cabin rather than approaching it. Someone had walked the perimeter in the night, careful not to leave obvious signs, careful enough to assume no one would notice subtlety. They were wrong. Ryan crouched beside the tracks, fingers brushing the edges. The snow was new, but the compression underneath told a story of patience and time. This wasn't a drunk hunter or a lost hiker. This was someone watching. Frost stood at Ryan's shoulder, tail low, head level, gaze fixed outward. Ryan rested a hand briefly against the dog's neck, feeling the powerful muscle beneath the fur. The dog leaned into the touch for half a second, then shifted forward again. Duty before comfort. Ryan spent the morning reinforcing small things, moving firewood, adjusting sightlines, clearing snow away from the cabin's edges. He didn't call anyone. He didn't need to. Years of service had taught him that the first move belonged to the observer, not the observed. By noon, the tracks were gone, erased by falling snow, but the message remained. You are seen. He was splitting logs when a car engine broke the quiet. Frost reacted instantly, positioning himself between Ryan and the road, stance wide and immovable. A sedan eased up the drive, stopping well short of the cabin. The driver's door opened and Hannah Blake stepped out, hands visible, posture deliberate. In daylight she looked younger than Ryan had expected, pale skin flushed from the cold, gray eyes sharp behind simple glasses. Her hair was braided tight down her back, practical, no loose strands. She moved with the confidence of someone used to being ignored until she chose not to be. I figured you wouldn't come to town again so soon, she called, voice calm but carrying. Didn't want to surprise you. Ryan straightened slowly, axe still in hand. You're on private property. I know, Hannah said. I won't stay long. She glanced briefly at Frost, curiosity flickering into something more serious. That dog, he's not just trained, he's conditioned. Ryan studied her, weighing angles. Frost remained still, eyes locked on Hannah, not aggressive, just attentive. You should go, Ryan said. Hannah nodded once, acknowledging the warning. Sheriff Grady made some calls this morning. He's asking questions that don't match a simple registration issue. She paused, choosing her words carefully. People like me notice patterns. People like him hide them. Ryan's jaw tightened. You don't know what you're stepping into. I do, Hannah replied quietly. I grew up in places where authority wore clean uniforms and did ugly things behind closed doors. She met his eyes. I'm not here to make your life harder. I think someone already is. Frost shifted then, taking one step forward, placing himself squarely between Hannah and the cabin. His hackles didn't rise. He simply blocked the path, deliberate and calm. Hannah exhaled slowly, impressed despite herself. He's protecting a structure, she said. Not you. Ryan glanced down at the dog. Frost didn't look back. Before Ryan could respond, another vehicle appeared at the edge of the road, a dark SUV, unmarked, engine idling too smoothly for a local truck. It didn't approach. It didn't leave. It just waited. Hannah's gaze followed Ryan's, and her expression hardened. That's not mine, she said softly. Ryan felt the familiar cold clarity settle in his chest. The watcher had returned, this time without snow to hide behind. Frost let out a single low breath, not a growl, not a bark, but a warning shaped like restraint. The SUV lingered for a long count, then rolled back down the road and disappeared. Silence reclaimed the clearing, heavier than before. Hannah swallowed. "They wanted you to see them," she said. Ryan nodded once. "And now I've seen enough." He looked at Frost, at the dog's scarred neck and unwavering posture. Saving the dog had dragged something long buried into the open. Whatever Frost had escaped from hadn't given up. Ryan turned back to Hannah. "If you're staying in this," he said, voice low and final, "you listen when I tell you to leave." Hannah met his gaze, resolve sharpening. "Then you listen when I tell you this isn't just about the dog anymore." Frost remained between them, the quiet axis of a decision that had already been made. By the second night after the SUV appeared, the cabin no longer felt like shelter. It felt like a position being tested. The temperature dropped sharply after sunset, the kind of cold that made wood creak and metal complain. Ryan adjusted the lantern wick and listened to the quiet. Not the peaceful kind, but the alert silence that lived between heartbeats. Frost paced once along the wall, then stopped near the back window, posture aligned with the dark beyond the glass. Ryan knew that stance. It meant waiting, not worrying. Morning brought necessity again. Frost's paws were healing, but infection didn't respect pride or preparation, and Ryan wouldn't gamble with guesswork. The nearest veterinarian was 30 miles south, in a lakeside town small enough to pretend it was invisible. Ryan loaded Frost into the truck before dawn, choosing the hour deliberately. The road hugged the frozen shoreline, ice glittering like broken mirrors. Frost rode upright, balanced, eyes tracking movement without tension. The clinic was a squat building with peeling white paint and a hand-painted sign that read, "Whitman Animal Care." Inside, it smelled of antiseptic and old coffee. Sarah Whitman emerged from a back room, wiping her hands on a towel. She was a white American woman in her early 40s, medium height, slim but sturdy, with sandy blonde hair cut just below her jaw in a practical line that framed a face marked by years of squinting into winter glare. Her skin was fair and weathered, her eyes a calm blue that had learned patience the hard way. She wore jeans, boots, and a fleece vest over scrubs, sleeves rolled up, forearms corded with quiet strength. Sarah had grown up here, left once, come back after her father's stroke, and learned to read animals better than people because animals didn't lie about pain. She crouched in front of Frost without hesitation, letting him sniff her hands. Frost allowed it, ears flicking once, eyes steady. "He's not a pet," Sarah said calmly, not looking at Ryan. "But he's not dangerous either." "No," Ryan replied. "He's disciplined." Sarah nodded, examining the paws, the shoulders, the neck. When she saw the tattoo behind Frost's ear, her jaw tightened just a fraction. "That's not county or state," she said. "I've seen working dogs, police, search, and rescue. This is something else." Ryan didn't answer. He didn't need to. Sarah cleaned and treated the wounds with efficient care, her touch firm but respectful. Frost endured it without flinching. When she finished, she stood and washed her hands slowly. "You should know," she said, lowering her voice. "Sheriff Grady called yesterday. Asked if anyone had brought in a large shepherd matching a description." Ryan felt the familiar internal click as pieces aligned. And I told him no," Sarah said evenly, "because no one had." Her eyes met Ryan's, searching. "Whatever this is, it's not about animal welfare." On the way back, Ryan took a longer route, looping through a logging road half buried in snow. He watched the mirrors. He watched Frost. The dog's head snapped up once, ears sharp, then relaxed. A warning passed, then faded. They were 2 miles from the cabin when the engine coughed. Once, twice, then died. Ryan coasted to the shoulder, breath fogging. Frost stood instantly, turning to face the tree line. Ryan popped the hood, the cold biting his fingers. The fuel line had been sliced cleanly. Not torn. Cut. "All right," Ryan said softly. "Message received." He worked fast. bypassing what he could, rigging a temporary fix with practiced hands. The forest pressed in, silent. Frost didn't bark. He didn't growl. He simply stood, eyes locked on the woods, body angled between Ryan and whatever might step out. After 10 minutes that felt like an hour, the engine caught. Ryan slammed the hood shut and drove. The cabin came into view intact, smoke lifting from the chimney where Ryan had banked the fire earlier. Relief was brief. The front door was ajar. Ryan stopped short, heart rate steady, mind cold. He signaled Frost with 2 fingers. The dog moved first, silent as breath, clearing corners with mechanical precision. Inside, nothing was stolen, nothing was broken. But something had been changed. On the table lay a single object Ryan did not own, a black zip tie, cut cleanly in half. A warning, simple and intimate. We were here. We can be closer. Ryan sank into a chair, exhaling slowly. The room felt smaller. Frost approached and sat at his feet, back straight, eyes forward, not seeking reassurance, offering it. Ryan rested a hand on the dog's shoulder, feeling the solid truth of him. "You didn't fall into that lake by accident," Ryan said quietly. The realization wasn't bitter. It was clear. Whoever Frost belonged to before had lost him once. They weren't planning to lose him again. Outside, the wind picked up, dragging snow across the clearing in thin white lines like chalk marks. Ryan stood and began packing essentials with deliberate calm. Food, medical supplies, documents. He didn't know where the line would be drawn, but he knew one thing with absolute certainty: staying passive was no longer an option. Frost rose with him, matching his movements, a shadow that did not waver. The cold had drawn a line, and both of them were already standing on the same side of it. Dawn arrived without drama, a thin gold seam opening along the frozen edge of Lake Superior, as if the world itself had decided to soften its grip. Ryan stood outside the cabin, breath rising in slow clouds. Frost beside him, both of them watching light reclaim the snow 1 careful inch at a time. The night before had been long, filled with preparation rather than fear. Once you accepted the line had been crossed, clarity followed. Ryan had made his call before sunrise, using an old satellite phone he kept buried in a toolbox. Insurance from a former life. The voice on the other end belonged to Ethan Caldwell, a white American man in his early 40s, lean and sharp-featured, with a perpetual 5 o'clock shadow and eyes that carried the tired humor of someone who had seen too much but refused to turn cold. Ethan had served with Ryan years ago, left the Navy to join a federal investigative task force that specialized in private security contractors operating in legal gray zones. Where Ryan sought silence, Ethan had chosen confrontation, channeling his anger into systems instead of solitude. By mid-morning, unmarked vehicles moved quietly along the distant road, not prowling this time, but purposeful. Frost noticed them first, ears lifting, posture alert but calm. He did not signal threat. He signaled recognition. Ryan felt the tension he'd been carrying for weeks loosen a fraction. Ethan arrived on foot, approaching openly, hands visible. He wore a plain winter jacket, dark jeans, and boots dusted with snow, blending easily into the landscape. His expression shifted when he saw Frost up close, the tattoo, the scars, the stillness that spoke louder than aggression. "Damn," Ethan said softly. "They really did it again." What followed unfolded without gunfire or shouting, which somehow made it more satisfying. Evidence Ryan and Hannah had quietly gathered. Vehicle sightings, the cut fuel line, the veterinarian's account, timestamps, met federal warrants already in motion. Sheriff Grady was detained later that afternoon in Duluth, his authority collapsing not with spectacle, but with paperwork and handcuffs. The unmarked SUV belonged to a shell company tied to an illicit canine procurement program that had lost track of one of its assets. Frost's file surfaced, incomplete and damning. He had been scheduled for relocation. The lake had interrupted that plan. Hannah arrived shortly after, notebook tucked under her arm, eyes bright with the fierce joy of a story that mattered. She stood back at first, respecting the space, then crouched to Frost's level. "Looks like you chose the right human," she said lightly. Frost tilted his head, then looked to Ryan before sitting. The decision, apparently, was mutual. Sarah Whitman came by in the evening with a crate of medical supplies and a bottle of cheap champagne she admitted she'd been saving for something worth opening. She looked relieved for the first time since Ryan had met her, shoulders less tense, smile real. "You're both safe," she said, meaning more than one thing. She knelt to check Frost's healing paws, nodding with satisfaction. "Strong heart, strong head. He'll be fine." The weeks that followed reshaped everything quietly. Charges were filed, investigations widened, names disappeared from letterheads. No headlines screamed Ryan's name, which suited him fine. Hannah wrote carefully, focusing on systems rather than saviors, on accountability rather than spectacle. Ethan checked in once more before leaving, clapping Ryan on the shoulder with a grin that carried both pride and warning. "You don't get to disappear again," he said. "Not entirely." Spring came late, but it came. Ice retreated from the lake in dark, cracking sheets, and Frost discovered mud with the solemn intensity of a scientist. Ryan laughed more than he meant to, the sound rusty, but real. The cabin felt different now, not watched, not threatened, but inhabited. Purpose had a way of warming spaces the stove never could. One afternoon, Ryan and Frost walked the shoreline where everything had begun. The ice was gone, the water moving freely, reflecting sky instead of trapping it. Frost stopped at the edge, ears forward, then turned away on his own, choosing land. Ryan rested a hand on the dog's neck, feeling the steady pulse there. "You're home," he said, not as a promise, but a fact. That night, Ryan sat on the porch, coffee steaming, Frost at his feet, Hannah's latest article open on his phone. Beyond the words, beyond the investigations, there was something simpler settling into place. He hadn't saved a dog to fix himself. But in giving shelter, he had found it again. Trust, routine, a future not defined by what he fled. The ice had let go, and in its place remained something solid enough to stand on. Loyalty freely chosen, and a life moving forward, one quiet, hopeful step at a time. Sometimes miracles do not arrive with thunder or blinding light. Sometimes they come quietly, through freezing water and trembling paws, through a life that refuses to give up on another. If you believe in God, then you may believe this too. God often works through compassion, through the hands that reach into the cold, through the courage to protect the vulnerable when it would be easier to walk away, through the bond between a human soul and an animal soul, both wounded, both chosen to heal together. In our everyday lives, we may never face a frozen lake or a moment as dramatic as Ryan's, but we are given chances every day to choose kindness over fear, responsibility over indifference, love over isolation. A small act of care can become a shelter. A single choice can become a second chance. And sometimes, saving another life is how God quietly saves our own. If this story touched your heart, please take a moment to share it with someone who might need hope today. Leave a comment and tell us what this story made you feel or where you are watching from. Your words matter more than you know. And if you believe that no soul should be left behind, subscribe to the channel so we can continue sharing stories of loyalty, healing, and grace. May God bless you and your loved ones. May He watch over you in the cold moments of life and guide you toward warmth, purpose, and peace.